Hey guys, and welcome to another video lecture for Psych 370. This one's going to pick up right where the last one left off. So this is another excerpt from that same Zoom class. And in that previous video lecture, I talked about the four components of classical conditioning: the US, the UR, the CS, and the CR. So in this one, I'm going to be talking about the acquisition and extinction phases of classical conditioning, as well as a couple of phenomena that we can observe after the extinction phase, which we call spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition. Okay, well, speaking of things that are probably review, I should also talk now about a fairly straightforward distinction that we make in classical conditioning between what we call the acquisition and extinction processes, or the acquisition and extinction phases. But these terms are pretty easy. This distinction, I said it was pretty straightforward because these terms, acquisition and extinction, mean pretty much what you'd think they'd mean. So during the acquisition process, the person or the animal is acquiring the conditioned response, right? They're learning to make it. So in classical conditioning experiments, acquisition trials are where the CS and the US are being paired together, right? And as you can see here, as a result of those pairings, we typically see the conditioned response getting stronger, right? More acquisition trials equals a stronger conditioned response. Okay, so again, think of it like it's acquisition, right? So the animal is acquiring the conditioned response. Why is it acquiring it? Because the CS is being paired with the US, right? So that's what happens during acquisition. You pair these two stimuli and the conditioned response gets stronger. And then during the extinction process, what you would do is you'd continue to present that conditioned stimulus, but you'd stop following it with the unconditioned stimulus. Okay? So you'd present the CS without the US. You present the CS all by itself. That's how an extinction trial works. So we actually saw one extinction trial, so to speak, in that video from earlier, right? When Jim played the computer sound all by itself with no Altoid afterward, he was presenting Dwight with the conditioned stimulus, right? But not the unconditioned stimulus, so we call that an extinction trial. And if he had kept going like that, if he had kept giving Dwight extinction trials like those, where he heard the sound and didn't get the Altoid, then obviously Dwight would eventually stop extending his hand and salivating when he heard the computer sound. Okay, so those responses, those conditioned responses that he had previously acquired, would get extinguished because Dwight would eventually learn that now hearing the sound no longer means that I'm about to get an Altoid. Okay. So guys, I described it that way. I described extinction as Dwight learning that there's been a change in what the sound signifies, because extinction is really better understood as a case of learning in its own right rather than as forgetting. Okay? So during extinction, the person or the animal's behavior is still changing due to experience, right? It's still doing that. It's just that now the conditioned response is decreasing in strength rather than increasing. And now the experience that's causing that change is the CS occurring all by itself instead of the CS occurring with the US, which is the experience that causes the change in acquisition. But with extinction, there's still a change in behavior that results from these experiences, right? And like I said, it makes more sense to think of what happens during extinction as learning in its own right rather than as something like forgetting. Okay, so it's not like the person or the animal just forgets the CR during the extinction process. They don't just unlearn that response. And guys, I say that because of two sort of post-extinction phenomena, you could call them, that I need to tell you about now. Okay, so these are both things that we could see in an animal after it has gone through both the acquisition process and then the extinction process. These are post-extinction phenomena. Okay? And they're called spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition. Okay? Spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition. I'll tell you about spontaneous recovery first. So again, both of these things are phenomena that you would see after an animal has acquired a conditioned response, so after you've paired the CS with the US a bunch of times, and after you've then extinguished that response by presenting the CS all by itself a bunch of times. Okay? So you put the animal through an acquisition phase, and then you put it through an extinction phase. So for example, maybe you did pair a bell with food here during acquisition, right? Like here's the bell, here's the food, here's the bell, here's the food, over and over again like that, until the animal salivated quite strongly to the bell. We've got drops of saliva elicited by the CS here. That's what these data points represent. Okay, so you put the animal through that acquisition phase, and then during extinction, you present the bell all by itself, right? You present that conditioned stimulus all by itself without the food until the bell is no longer eliciting salivation. Right? Acquisition, then extinction. So, what do you do next? Well, one thing that you could do is just let some time pass, okay? Introduce a little time interval here, like maybe 24 hours or so, where the animal does not hear the bell. And then, after that time interval has elapsed, you present the bell again. So for this first spontaneous recovery trial here, you just present the bell, that CS, for the first time in a long time. Okay, it's the first time that the animal has heard that bell in a while. And as you can see in the graph, what usually happens is, even though it wasn't salivating at all to the bell at the end of the extinction phase, now, just because all this time has passed where it didn't hear that bell, now, once it hears it again, it salivates in response to it again. So it recovers that conditioned response that it had to the bell, right? And guys, we say that it's recovering that response spontaneously because it didn't get any additional acquisition trials that would explain why that conditioned response sort of comes back from the dead like this, okay? So it's not like you would have been pairing the bell with the food again during this time interval, right? Again, the animal just doesn't hear the bell at all during the time interval. So there's no additional acquisition trials here during the time interval that would explain why the conditioned response comes back like that. It just comes back spontaneously. The animal recovers that response, at least to some extent, simply due to the passage of all this time where it didn't encounter that conditioned stimulus. So again, that's called spontaneous recovery. Spontaneous recovery is basically the reappearance after a delay of a previously extinguished conditioned response. Okay, so that's one post-extinction phenomenon, right? Spontaneous recovery. The response could just sort of come back from the dead like this if the animal hasn't been exposed to the conditioned stimulus in a while. And a related phenomenon is called rapid reacquisition, which, as the name suggests, is the tendency for an animal to reacquire a conditioned response more quickly in fewer trials than it originally acquired it. So something else you could do here at the end of the extinction phase would be, rather than just letting some time pass and then presenting the CS all by itself again, what you could do instead is go back to pairing the CS with the US again. Okay? So basically, again, these are both post-extinction phenomena, right? You go through acquisition, then extinction. But basically, with spontaneous recovery, you basically introduce a second extinction phase after the first one, right? Because to demonstrate spontaneous recovery, you present the CS all by itself again, just like you were doing during extinction. And with rapid reacquisition, you basically introduce a second acquisition phase after the extinction phase, because now you're back to pairing the CS with the US again. Okay. And you look at how quickly the animal reacquires the conditioned response compared to how quickly it originally acquired it. Okay. And again, what you usually see is that that reacquisition is more rapid. It takes fewer acquisition trials the second time around for that animal to start making the same strength conditioned response that it was making the first time around. Rapid reacquisition. Reacquisition is more rapid than initial acquisition. And again, guys, the reason I'm talking about these, the importance of these phenomena, spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition, is that they demonstrate that extinction doesn't just undo what happens during acquisition. Again, extinction doesn't just involve forgetting the conditioned response, because even after that extinction process has taken place, the animal can still spontaneously recover that response if it's been a while since they encountered the CS, or they can reacquire it more quickly if that CS goes back to being a reliable predictor of the US. So, guys, that association between the CS and the US, it must, even after extinction, it must still be sort of lurking behind the scenes, right? That original learning that the animal did during acquisition must still be there. It must be preserved still somewhere in the animal's mind, even after that outward, observable conditioned response has been extinguished. So anyway, guys, acquisition and extinction are both these important processes in classical conditioning. Okay, it's important that you know what those are and what happens during acquisition trials and during extinction trials. Right? And again, spontaneous recovery and rapid reacquisition are important too, because of what they tell us about extinction. Right? Tell us extinction, you're really just learning to suppress that conditioned response. You're not eliminating it, forgetting it, undoing it, or anything like that. Okay, well, I'll stop this video lecture there. The next one will pick up from there. And as always, if you have any questions about this stuff, then please let me know. Take care.